Jakob Nielsen held a Q&A session during our July virtual UX conference. Athir from Chicago said that many people cite Jakob as a source of inspiration, and he asked who Jakob looks to for his own inspiration.
Many people, certainly during the years, but one in the very beginning was Ted Nielsen, and that's Nilsson, not Nielsen, so no relation. But Ted Nielsen is the guy who invented hypertext, and he was, back in the 1980s, he was like a kind of radical person in terms of talking about how computers could be completely different than they were at the time, where most use of computers were for payroll processing or for scientific calculations and those type of things. So he actually wrote a book called Literary Machines that I bought when I was a graduate student, and I still have it. And this book was like kind of homemade, because he's like sort of just made up on his typewriter and hand-drawn, see if we can find anything with the illustrations, kind of hand-drawn illustrations and everything. So again, he was a bit of an old hippie guy, but honestly very inspiring. And I really got into this notion of hypertext, which is like when the web came around, well, then knowing about usability and hypertext, that was a great combo. So Ted Nielsen was a great inspiration for me in the early days. Then later on, when I actually became a professional, I got jobs and all of that, I worked at IBM's research headquarters in Yorktown Heights in New York, and there were many great people there that I admired, many of them. But particularly, I'd like to mention John Gould as an inspiration. So John Gould was one of the senior researchers there, and he was actually in many ways very different than me. He was a very classical psychologist in terms of like very rigorous experimentation. I'm more on the side of let's do some sort of simple, quick experiments, but he was very rigorous, and he just taught me like you can just study anything. You just have to put your mind to designing the experiment right. And I remember that he was studying how you could do 3D manipulation, kind of reminded me about this question about how you do VR. They didn't have any of that technology at the time. So what he was doing, he made studies where the participants were given like a Mr. Potato Head doll and had to manipulate that doll in various ways. And so I was actually one of the pilot participants in this study. As it turns out, I'd grown up in Denmark where we didn't have Mr. Potato Head dolls. So I was kind of stumped on how to use that doll, that toy. So that was kind of actually a good learning experience as well, because you really have to kind of recognize how participants often think that they're stupid when they can't do something, even though, of course, it's the user interface that's bad, as we always say. But it's you experience that yourself when you're in the study, and you have a hard time doing something very simple like play with a children's toy just because you never tried that toy before. So John was really a great inspiration to me in many, many ways. More recently, I would also mention somebody like JYP. He's a K-pop star. It's not really because I like actually several of his songs, but that's not really why I mentioned him. But he also, in addition to performing songs himself, he's also written about 50 kind of hit songs, and for many others, and he's put together a lot of these groups that perform. And so this notion that you can kind of not just only be your own presenter, your own star, but you can actually put together the teams. And one thing he's done recently, he's Korean, but his most recent project was to put together a Japanese group, which I think is another thing that's kind of inspiring to me, this notion that we are worldwide and we've got to reach out beyond just where we are from ourselves and pull that together. I don't think I'm personally going to go and like hire 9 Japanese teenagers, and train them like he's doing. But that approach, though, I think is very interesting. And actually, one last thing I would mention as an inspiration, this is Sir Ernest Shackleton, the British polar explorer. And I would not have mentioned him until recently because I have no inspiration or idea that I want to like live off a penguin for 2 years or anything of that nature. But it's just because of the current situation with the pandemic, So Shackleton is famous for that. That's actually a nice book. I'd also like to recommend a book about Shackleton. So this one called The Endurance. Endurance was the name of his ship. You can see here how the ship was frozen in the ice. So his crew was trapped for 2 years living off penguin meat. The name of the ship was very prophetic in that sense. But what Sir Ernest Shackleton is famous for is that he brought back every single member of that crew despite that hardship. And I think that's really inspiring in these current circumstances. So you just want to like bring your team home, despite the situation. So that I think is another good inspiration.